The dust kicked up around Sarah's bare feet as her father shoved her forward into the center of the trading post yard, and she stumbled, catching herself before she fell face first into the dirt of Salida, Colorado territory, in the scorching summer of 1878. She had known this day might come, had seen it in her father's desperate eyes for months now as the drought strangled their already failing homestead. But knowing and experiencing were two vastly different things. "She's strong," her father was saying, his voice rough and broken, not meeting her eyes. "Can cook clean, so she'll work hard for you." The man examining her like livestock was Silas Pemberton, a prosperous but cruel farmer from the next county over, his belly straining against his dirty shirt, his breath reeking of whiskey even at 10 in the morning. He walked around her in a slow circle, and Sarah forced herself to stand tall, to not give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. She was 20 years old, and this was not how she had imagined her life would unfold. "She looks scrawny," Pemberton said, reaching out to grab her arm, squeezing the muscle there. Sarah jerked away instinctively, and her father's hand shot out, gripping her shoulder hard enough to bruise. "She eats less than most, so she'll cost you nothing to feed," her father said, and Sarah felt something inside her chest crack at the words. This was the man who had once carried her on his shoulders through spring meadows, who had taught her to read from his mother's old Bible. Desperation had turned him into someone she no longer recognized. "I'll give you the plow," Pemberton said slowly, stroking his graying beard, "and 1 sack of grain." "2 sacks," her father countered. "We agreed on 2. That was before I saw how thin she is. 1 sack." Sarah watched the negotiation over her life, her future, her body, as if from a great distance. Around them, the trading post continued its usual business. Men loaded supplies onto wagons, horses stamped and snorted at the hitching posts, and somewhere a dog barked incessantly. The July sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down her back beneath her faded calico dress. 2 sacks or no deal," her father said, and there was an edge of panic in his voice now. Without this trade, without the plow and grain, her mother and 3 younger siblings would likely starve before winter. Sarah understood this, even as she hated it, even as she hated him for it. "Fine," Pemberton finally agreed. 2 sacks. "But I want the transaction done proper, in front of witnesses." That was when Sarah noticed the other man watching from the shadow of the trading post's covered porch. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, even from a distance. They were a striking shade of gray-blue, and unlike everyone else who had looked at her that morning, there was no calculation in them, no assessment of her value. There was only what looked like anger. The cowboy pushed off from the post where he had been leaning and walked toward them with the easy, rolling gait of a man who spent more time on horseback than on foot. As he got closer, Sarah could see he was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 24 or 25, with a strong jaw and a mouth set in a grim line. "Excuse me," the cowboy said, his voice a low drawl that carried the hint of Texas in it, "but did I just hear correctly? You're trading your daughter?" "None of your concern, stranger," Pemberton said, turning to face the newcomer. "This is private business." "Seems like it's being conducted pretty publicly," the cowboy observed, glancing around at the growing number of onlookers, "and I'm making it my concern." Sarah's father stepped forward, his face flushed. "My family is starving. I've got a wife and 3 other children who need feeding. This is the only way." "There's always another way," the cowboy said quietly, but his eyes had gone hard as flint. You don't know nothing about it, her father shot back. You don't know what it's like to watch your children go hungry, to see your crops fail year after year, to have nothing left to sell. But he broke off, unable to finish the sentence. The cowboy was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Sarah's father to Pemberton and finally landing on Sarah herself. She met his eyes steadily, refusing to look away, refusing to be ashamed of something that was not her fault. Something passed between them in that moment, some wordless communication that Sarah did not fully understand but felt deep in her bones. How much? The cowboy asked. What? Pemberton turned to him, confused. How much is the trade? What are you giving for her? A plow and 2 sacks of grain, Pemberton said slowly, suspicion creeping into his expression. But that's already agreed upon. You can't just, I'll give you a plow and 2 sacks of grain, the cowboy said, addressing Sarah's father now. Right now, today. Sarah felt her heart begin to pound. This stranger, this man she had never seen before in her life, was offering to buy her instead. She did not know if that was better or worse, did not know what his intentions might be, but something in his steady gaze made her want to trust him, and that terrified her almost as much as the thought of going with Pemberton. Now wait just a minute, Pemberton sputtered, his face going red. We had a deal. No deal's final until money or goods change hands, the cowboy said calmly, and I'm offering the same terms. He looked at Sarah's father. Seems to me you should take the best offer for your family's sake. Sarah's father looked between the two men, clearly torn. Pemberton was known in the territory, had a farm and standing. This cowboy was a complete stranger, but there was something in Pemberton's expression, a possessive hunger that made even her father hesitate. Who are you? Her father asked the cowboy. Name's Riley Mercer, the cowboy said. I work the Box T Ranch, about 15 miles west of here. Been saving my wages for 2 years to start my own spread. Got enough to buy you a plow and 2 sacks of grain. That's all your savings? Sarah found herself asking, speaking for the first time since the negotiations had begun. Why would you spend that on a stranger? Riley turned to look at her again, and this time there was something almost like a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Because it's the right thing to do, madam, and because I've got a feeling about this. A feeling? Pemberton laughed harshly. Boy, you're a fool, spending your life savings on a woman you don't even know. Maybe so, Riley agreed mildly, but at least I'll be able to sleep at night. He turned back to Sarah's father. What do you say? Do we have a deal? Sarah watched her father's face, saw the war between desperation and something that might have been the last shred of his conscience. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, but I want to see the plow and grain first. Fair enough, Riley said. They're being held at the general store. I was planning to pick them up tomorrow, but we can do it today. Come on. The group moved toward the general store, Pemberton following along and protesting loudly that he had been cheated, that the original deal should stand. Sarah walked behind the men, her mind reeling. In the space of 10 minutes, her entire life had changed direction twice. She did not know Riley Mercer, did not know what he wanted from her or what would happen next. All she knew was that something in her had responded to him, some instinct that told her he was different from Pemberton, different from any man she had met before. Inside the general store, which smelled of coffee and leather and tobacco, Riley spoke quietly with the proprietor, a balding man named Henderson who had run the store for as long as Sarah could remember. After a brief conversation and the exchange of what looked like a significant amount of money, Henderson nodded and gestured to the back of the store. Plow's out back, Henderson said, and I can have 2 sacks of grain ready in 5 minutes. The transaction was completed with an efficiency that made Sarah's head spin. Within a quarter hour, her father was loading the plow onto his rickety wagon, the 2 sacks of grain already secured in the bed. He had not looked at Sarah once during the entire process, and she wondered if he could not bear to if the shame was too great. But as he prepared to leave, he finally turned to her, his weathered face haggard. "Sarah, he stopped, swallowed hard. "Your mother will pray for you every day." "We all will." "That's it." The words came out harder than Sarah had intended. "You sell me like a piece of property and you're going to pray for me. What else can I do?" His voice broke. "We're starving, Sarah. Your brother is sick. He needs medicine." "Your sisters, I know," Sarah said, cutting him off. She did know. She had seen her 7-year-old sister's ribs showing through her thin nightgown, had heard her brother's rattling cough in the night. Anger and understanding warred inside her, and she did not know which would win. "Just go. Take care of them." Her father climbed onto the wagon seat, looking old and defeated. He picked up the reins, then paused. "The cowboy," he said quietly, not looking at her. "He's got kind eyes, that counts for something." Then he was gone, the wagon creaking down the dusty main street of Salida, and Sarah was left standing outside the general store with a man she did not know, who had just spent his life savings on her for reasons she could not fathom. Pemberton had stormed off earlier, still cursing and threatening legal action, though everyone knew there was no law against what had happened here today, no matter how morally repugnant it might be. Riley stood a few feet away, his hat in his hands now, looking uncertain for the first time since Sarah had seen him. "Madam," he said formally, "I reckon we should talk." "I reckon we should," Sarah agreed, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Starting with what exactly you expect from this transaction." Riley's eyebrows rose. "Expect? I don't expect anything. You just spent your life savings. Everyone expects something in return for that." "Not everyone." Riley looked around at the people still watching them with undisguised curiosity. "But maybe we should have this conversation somewhere more private. There's a small restaurant 2 doors down. Can I buy you a meal? I'm guessing you haven't eaten much today." Sarah's stomach was in knots, and the thought of food made her feel ill. But she recognized the offer for what it was, a chance to talk in relative privacy, to understand what her life had just become. She nodded and followed Riley down the wooden sidewalk to a small establishment with a hand-painted sign that read, "Rosa's Kitchen." Inside, the restaurant was blessedly cool and dim after the harsh sunlight. A Mexican woman with gray streaks in her dark hair smiled at Riley with obvious familiarity. "Riley, I did not expect to see you in town today." "Change of plans, Rosa," Riley said, his voice warm. "This is Miss Sarah. We'd like a table if you have one available." Rosa's sharp eyes took in the situation quickly, noting Sarah's bare feet and worn dress, the tension in both their postures. But she simply smiled and gestured to a table in the back corner. "Of course. I will bring you both the special. You look like you could use some good food." Once they were seated, an awkward silence fell between them. Sarah studied the man across from her, really looking at him for the first time. Up close, she could see the sun-weathered creases at the corners of his eyes, the strength in his hands as they rested on the table. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, but more than that, there was something steady about him, something solid. "Why did you do it?" Sarah asked finally. "And please don't tell me it was just the right thing to do. Nobody spends 2 years of savings just because it's right." Riley was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. Rosa had brought coffee immediately, along with water, and Sarah sipped hers gratefully, realizing how thirsty she was. "My mother was sold," Riley said finally, his voice low. "Not exactly like what was happening to you, but close enough. After my father died, Her family traded her to a man who needed a wife to take care of his children. She was 16. He was 45 and mean as a rattlesnake. She died when I was 10, worked to death and broken in spirit long before that. Sarah felt her throat tighten. I'm sorry. I swore when I was old enough to understand what had happened to her that I'd never let it happen to another woman if I could prevent it. Riley looked up, meeting her eyes. So when I heard what was happening in that yard, I couldn't walk away. Maybe that makes me a fool, like Pemberton said. Maybe I just threw away my future, but I couldn't live with myself if I'd done nothing. So what happens now? Sarah asked. What am I to you? A wife? A servant? What? Nothing, Riley said firmly. You're nothing to me except a person who deserves better than being traded like livestock. You're free, Sarah. That's why I did this, to give you your freedom back. Sarah stared at him, certain she had misheard. Free, what does that mean? It means you can do whatever you want. Stay here in Salida, find work, or go somewhere else, start over. I'll help you however I can. I've got friends here, connections. Rosa might be able to give you work here at the restaurant, or I know some families who need help. Good families who would treat you right and pay you fair wages. But you spent everything you had. That was my choice, Riley interrupted gently. You don't owe me anything for it. I won't lie and say it doesn't sting to see those savings gone, but I made the choice with clear eyes. It'll take me longer to get my own ranch now, but I'll get there eventually. The important thing is that you're not bound to anyone, not to Pemberton, not to me, not to anyone. Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She had not cried during the entire ordeal, had not allowed herself that weakness, but Riley's unexpected kindness was threatening to undo her completely. I don't understand you. Don't have to understand me, Riley said with a small smile. Just have to decide what you want to do next. Rosa arrived then with 2 plates of food, chicken in a rich, spicy sauce with beans and rice and warm tortillas. The smell made Sarah's stomach growl audibly, and she realized she had not eaten since the previous morning. Riley had been right about that. They ate in silence for a few minutes, Sarah trying to process everything that had happened, everything Riley had said. Freedom. The word felt foreign, impossible. She had never really been free, had always belonged to someone, first her parents, then nearly to Pemberton. And now apparently to no one. The thought was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. I don't have anywhere to go, Sarah said finally, setting down her fork. I can't go back to my family, that's clear, and I don't know anyone in Salida well enough to ask for help. I've lived on the homestead my whole life. Like I said, I can help with that, Riley assured her. Rosa, for one. And there's a widow woman, Mrs. Fletcher, who runs a boarding house. She's respectable and kind. I bet she'd give you a room in exchange for help with cooking and cleaning until you can afford to pay rent proper. You've really thought this through. Had about 5 minutes to come up with a plan while walking to the general store, Riley admitted. But yes, I've been thinking about it. Sarah took a shaky breath. Can I ask you something? Anything? Do you have a wife? Someone waiting for you? No, madam. Never been married, never even been close. The ranch keeps me pretty busy and I've been focused on saving money. He paused. Why do you ask? Because I needed to know if I was disrupting your life even more than I already have. You haven't disrupted anything, Riley said firmly. And even if you had, it would be worth it. They finished their meal, and Riley insisted on ordering Sarah a slice of apple pie, which she ate slowly, savoring every bite. When was the last time she had eaten something sweet? She could not remember. As she ate, Riley talked a bit about the ranch where he worked, about the mountains and the cattle, about his hopes of one day having his own place. His voice was soothing, and Sarah found herself relaxing slightly, the knot of fear in her chest loosening a fraction. After they finished, Riley paid Rosa and they stepped back out into the afternoon heat. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains to the west, painting the sky in shades of gold. "Come on," Riley said. "Let's go talk to Mrs. Fletcher." Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house was a tidy two-story building on the quiet end of Salada's Main Street, with a small garden in front that was somehow managing to survive the drought. Mrs. Fletcher herself answered the door, a plump woman in her 50s with intelligent brown eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Riley Mercer," she said warmly. "I haven't seen you in town in months. What brings you here?" "A favor to ask, actually," Riley said, removing his hat. "This is Miss Sarah, and she's in need of a place to stay and possibly some work. I was hoping you might be able to help." Mrs. Fletcher's eyes moved to Sarah, taking in her appearance with a quick, assessing glance that missed nothing. "Come in, both of you." Inside, the boarding house was clean and comfortable, furnished simply but with care. Mrs. Fletcher led them to a small sitting room and gestured for them to sit. "Now then," she said, folding her hands in her lap. "Why don't you tell me what's really going on here? And I want the truth, Riley. I've known you since you were 18 and first came to this territory, and I can tell when something's not right." Riley glanced at Sarah, a question in his eyes, and she nodded slightly. If they were asking this woman for help, she deserved to know the situation. So Riley explained, his voice level but with an undercurrent of anger that had been absent when he spoke to Sarah. He told Mrs. Fletcher about the trading post, about Pemberton, about the trade Riley had made instead. Mrs. Fletcher listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled as the story progressed. When Riley finished, she turned to Sarah. "My dear," she said gently, "you've had a terrible day. And you've done nothing to deserve any of it. Of course you can stay here. I always need help with the cooking and laundry, and you can have a room on the second floor. Small but private and comfortable. We'll work out the details of payment later." Sarah felt tears threaten again. "Thank you," she managed. "I don't know what else to say." "Don't need to say anything," Mrs. Fletcher said briskly, standing up. "Let me show you to your room. You look like you could use some rest. Riley, you staying in town tonight?" "Was planning to head back to the ranch," Riley said, standing as well. "Need to be there for the morning work." "Of course." Mrs. Fletcher paused at the doorway. "You did a good thing today, Riley Mercer. Your mother would be proud." Something flickered in Riley's expression, a grief that was old but still sharp. "Thank you, madam. That means a lot." Sarah followed Mrs. Fletcher upstairs, but at the top she turned back to look at Riley, who was still standing in the sitting room, hat in hand. "Mr. Mercer," she called down. He looked up and their eyes met across the distance. "Thank you," Sarah said, putting every ounce of sincerity she felt into the words. "For everything. For what you sacrificed, I won't forget it." "No need for thanks," Riley said, but he was smiling, a real smile this time that crinkled the corners of his eyes and transformed his whole face. "You take care of yourself, Miss Sarah." Then he was gone, and Sarah was following Mrs. Fletcher down a narrow hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It contained a single bed with a clean quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the mountains. It was simple and sparse, but to Sarah, who had shared a cramped loft with her sisters for as long as she could remember, it looked like luxury. "I'll bring you up some water for washing," Mrs. Fletcher said. "And I have some dresses that might fit you from when I was younger and slimmer." "You're welcome to them. We'll get you some shoes too tomorrow when the general store opens." "Mrs. Fletcher, I can't possibly accept nonsense. We women have to look out for each other. Lord knows the men don't always do the job." Mrs. Fletcher patted Sarah's shoulder. "Rest now. Tomorrow you can start helping with breakfast, and we'll figure out the rest as we go." Alone in the room, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry. She cried for the father she had lost, even though he still lived. She cried for her mother and siblings, whom she might never see again. She cried for the loss of the life she had imagined for herself, simple as it had been. But underneath the grief, there was something else, something fragile and tentative: hope. And when she thought about that hope, she found herself thinking about a tall cowboy with kind gray-blue eyes who had given up everything to help a stranger. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and adjustment. Sarah threw herself into helping Mrs. Fletcher, desperate to prove her worth and to keep her mind occupied. She cooked and cleaned and did laundry for the boarding house's residents, a rotating cast of miners, cowboys, and traveling merchants. The work was hard, but no harder than what she had done on the homestead, and Mrs. Fletcher was a fair and kind employer. Nothing like the horror stories Sarah had heard about some households. She learned that Salida was a growing town, benefiting from the railroad that had come through a few years earlier. The Arkansas River ran through the valley, bringing life to the arid landscape, and the surrounding mountains held silver and other precious metals that drew fortune seekers from across the country. It was a rough town in many ways, with saloons and gambling halls and the violence that inevitably accompanied such places, but it also had families, churches, schools. It had civilization struggling to establish itself in the wilderness, and Sarah found she liked it. But despite the busyness of her days, Sarah found her thoughts returning again and again to Riley Mercer. She wondered how he was doing, if he was managing without his savings, if he regretted his impulsive decision. Part of her hoped he might come back to town, might stop by the boarding house to check on her, but weeks passed with no sign of him, and Sarah told herself she was being foolish. He had done what he had done out of principle, not out of any personal interest in her. He probably thought of her as a duty discharged, if he thought of her at all. She was wrong. Riley thought about Sarah constantly, to a degree that was beginning to interfere with his work. He would be in the middle of mending a fence or checking on cattle and find his mind wandering, wondering if she was settling in all right, if Mrs. Fletcher was treating her well, if she had everything she needed. He told himself he was just being conscientious, making sure his sacrifice had been worthwhile, but deep down he knew it was more than that. There had been something in Sarah's eyes that day at the trading post, a fierce dignity in the face of impossible circumstances that had struck him like a physical blow. And when she had looked at him in Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, when she had thanked him with such genuine gratitude, he had felt something shift inside his chest, some lock clicking open that he had not even known was there. But he stayed away, reasoning that Sarah needed time and space to figure out her own life without him complicating things. She had been through a trauma, had nearly been sold to a man like Pemberton. The last thing she needed was another man inserting himself into her life, even with good intentions. So Riley threw himself into his work at the Box T Ranch, trying to ignore the hollow feeling that had taken up residence somewhere in the region of his heart. It was Mrs. Fletcher who finally forced the issue, in her characteristic blunt manner. She arrived at the ranch on a Saturday morning in late August, driving her small buggy and looking determined. Riley, who had been shoeing a horse in the barn, looked up in surprise when he heard her voice calling his name. "Mrs. Fletcher." He set down the horse's hoof and walked out into the sunlight. "Is something wrong? Is Sarah all right?" "Sarah is fine," Mrs. Fletcher said, climbing down from the buggy with the ease of long practice. "Though she asks after you every time I go to town, which tells me more than she probably intends." Riley felt his face heat. "I was giving her space. Space is one thing. Abandonment is another." Mrs. Fletcher fixed him with a stern look. That girl has been through hell, Riley, and you were the one bright spot in the worst day of her life. And then you vanished. Do you have any idea how that looks? How that feels?" Riley had not thought about it that way, and guilt washed over him. "I didn't want to pressure her, didn't want her to feel obligated to what? Be civil to you. Have a conversation. Riley Mercer, I raised 3 children and buried 2 husbands, so let me tell you something I've learned. Sometimes people need space, but sometimes they need someone to show up. Sarah needs someone to show up. What if she doesn't want me around?" Riley asked quietly. "What if I'm just a reminder of the worst day of her life? Then she'll tell you so and you'll deal with it, but you won't know unless you try." Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened. "That girl lights up whenever your name is mentioned, Riley. She's too proud to say it, too uncertain of her place in the world right now, but she wants to see you. And unless I'm very much mistaken, you want to see her too." Riley could not deny it. "Yes, madam, I do." "Then come to dinner tomorrow. Sunday supper, 6 o'clock. I always cook too much anyway, and it will give you a chance to talk properly." After Mrs. Fletcher left, Riley found he could not concentrate on anything. He finished shoeing the horse with half his attention, then went to find his boss, Tom Cassidy, the owner of the Box T. Tom was a fair man in his 50s, weathered by decades of ranch work but still strong and capable. He listened as Riley explained, somewhat awkwardly, that he needed Sunday evening off, which was unusual since ranch work never really stopped. "This about that girl?" Tom asked, leaning against the corral fence. "The one you spent your savings on?" News traveled fast in these parts, and Riley was not surprised that Tom had heard. "Yes, sir." "You planning to court her proper?" Riley had not allowed himself to think that far ahead, but now that the question was posed directly, he realized the answer was yes. "If she'll have me, yes." Tom nodded slowly. "You're a good worker, Riley, one of the best I've had, and you're a good man. If you found someone who makes you happy, you'd be a fool not to pursue it. Take Sunday evening. Take Monday too if you need it." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate it." That night, Riley lay in his bunk in the small cabin he shared with 2 other ranch hands and stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. What would he say to Sarah? What if Mrs. Fletcher was wrong and Sarah did not want to see him? What if she had already moved on, found someone else? The thought made his chest ache in a way that told him more clearly than anything else that his feelings for Sarah ran deeper than simple concern. Sunday took an eternity to arrive. Riley spent the morning helping move cattle to a new pasture, then the afternoon trying to make himself presentable. He shaved carefully, trimmed his hair as best he could, and put on his best shirt, the one he usually reserved for trips to town or church services. The other ranch hands teased him mercilessly, but it was good-natured, and Riley took it with grace. He rode into Salida as the sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. The town was quiet on Sunday evening, most people home with their families, when Riley knocked on the door of Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone inside could hear it. Mrs. Fletcher answered with a knowing smile. "Right on time. Come in, Riley." Inside, the boarding house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread, and Riley's stomach growled despite his nervousness. Mrs. Fletcher led him to the dining room where the table was set for 3. A moment later, Sarah appeared in the doorway, and Riley forgot how to breathe. She was wearing a simple blue dress that must have been one of Mrs. Fletcher's, and someone, probably Mrs. Fletcher again, had helped her with her hair, which was pulled back in a loose braid that hung over one shoulder. She had filled out a bit in the past weeks, no longer quite so thin, and there was color in her cheeks. But it was her eyes that caught Riley and held him. They were wide with surprise and something else, something warm that made hope bloom in his chest. "Riley," Sarah said softly. "I didn't know you were coming." "I invited him," Mrs. Fletcher said briskly, bustling past them toward the kitchen. "You two sit down, I'll bring the food." An awkward silence fell as Riley and Sarah sat across from each other at the table. Riley cleared his throat. "You look well. So do you." Sarah's fingers played with the edge of her napkin. "How have you been? How's the ranch?" "Good, fine. Work is steady." Riley realized he was being absurdly formal and forced himself to relax. "I've been thinking about you, wondering how you were settling in." "Have you?" Sarah looked up, meeting his eyes. "I've been thinking about you too. I kept hoping you might stop by, but then when you didn't." She trailed off. "I thought I was giving you space," Riley admitted. "Mrs. Fletcher came and set me straight. She's good at that." A small smile tugged at Sarah's lips. "She's been wonderful to me. I don't know what I would have done without her." Mrs. Fletcher returned then with a platter of chicken, followed by bowls of potatoes, carrots, and gravy. "Stop being so polite, both of you," she instructed as she set everything on the table. "Talk like normal people. You're making me tired just listening to you." That broke the tension, and Sarah laughed, a sound that Riley realized he had never heard before. It was warm and genuine, and he found himself smiling in response. Over dinner, they talked more easily. Sarah told Riley about her work at the boarding house, about the people she had met, about the town, and all the new things she was discovering. Riley talked about the ranch, about his plans for the future. Plans that were now set back by a couple of years, but not abandoned. He talked about the land he had his eye on, a valley about 20 miles west with good water and grass, perfect for a small ranch. "It sounds beautiful," Sarah said wistfully. "I'd like to see it someday." "I could take you," Riley offered, then quickly added, "if you wanted. If you had time, I mean." "I'd like that," Sarah said, and her smile was shy but real. "Mrs. Fletcher watched this exchange with obvious satisfaction, saying nothing but missing nothing. After dinner, Mrs. Fletcher announced she had things to do in the kitchen and shooed them out to the front porch. It was a clear night, the stars brilliant in the darkness, and a cool breeze was finally bringing relief from the day's heat. They sat on the porch swing, careful to maintain a respectful distance, and for a while they just rocked gently, listening to the night sounds of the town settling down for sleep. "Sarah," Riley said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right." "Do you resent me for what happened that day? I know I stopped one bad situation, but maybe I put you in another kind of difficulty, leaving you here with nothing, having to work for your keep." "No," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Riley, you gave me my life back. Do you understand that? You gave me choice, gave me freedom. Yes, I have to work, but I'm working for myself, building my own future. If Pemberton had taken me..." She shuddered. "I don't like to think about what would have happened." "I don't either," Riley admitted, his hands clenching on the porch swing's chain. "Why did you stay away so long?" Sarah asked quietly. "Was it really just about giving me space?" Riley considered lying, considered deflecting, but Sarah deserved honesty. "Partly that, but also because I was scared." "Of what?" "Of this. Of what I might feel for you, what I was already starting to feel that day at the trading post." Riley turned to look at her, his heart in his throat. "Sarah, I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other, but I can't stop thinking about you. And I needed to stay away until I figured out what to do about that. Because you've already had one man spend everything he had on you for all the wrong reasons. And I didn't want you to think, Riley." Sarah reached out and took his hand, silencing him. Her hand was small in his, work roughened but warm. "You're nothing like Pemberton, nothing like my father either. You're the kindest man I've ever met, and if you want the truth, I can't stop thinking about you either." Riley felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. "Really? Really?" Sarah's smile was tremulous. I didn't know if you thought of me that way or if I was just someone you helped. A good deed and nothing more. But Mrs. Fletcher told me I should give you a chance to explain yourself, so I was hoping you might come by. Mrs. Fletcher is a meddling wonder, Riley said, but he was grinning. She is, Sarah agreed, laughing, but in the best possible way. They talked for hours on that porch until the night grew cold and Mrs. Fletcher finally came out to tell them both to get some sleep before they caught their deaths. Riley left with a promise to return the following Sunday and the Sunday after that, if Sarah would allow it. I'd like that very much, Sarah said, standing on the porch and watching him mount his horse. As Riley rode back toward the ranch, the stars wheeling overhead, he felt lighter than he had in years. The money he had spent, the savings he had sacrificed, suddenly felt like the best investment he had ever made. Over the following months, Riley and Sarah's courtship progressed slowly but steadily. Every Sunday, and sometimes on Wednesday evenings when Riley could get away from the ranch, he would come to town and they would spend time together. Sometimes they walked along the Arkansas River, watching the water rush past and talking about their dreams. Sometimes they attended church services together, sitting beside each other in the pew while Mrs. Fletcher beamed from across the aisle. Sometimes they simply sat on Mrs. Fletcher's porch, content just to be in each other's presence. Sarah learned that Riley had been orphaned at 12, after his mother's death, and had spent his teenage years working various ranches across Texas and Kansas before making his way to Colorado. He had educated himself from books he borrowed or bought when he could, had taught himself to read better by poring over newspapers and novels by lamplight. He was ambitious but not greedy, kind but not weak, and he had a dry sense of humor that made Sarah laugh when she least expected it. Riley learned that Sarah loved to read, but had rarely had access to books, that she had a gift for cooking that Mrs. Fletcher praised constantly, that she had once dreamed of being a teacher, but had never had the opportunity for enough education herself. He learned that she was fiercely loyal, deeply thoughtful, and possessed of a quiet strength that awed him. By the time the first snow fell in November, Riley knew he was in love with Sarah, completely and irrevocably. And unless he was very much mistaken, she loved him too. But he did not want to rush her, did not want to push. She had been through too much, needed time to heal and find herself. It was Sarah who finally brought up the future, one cold December evening as they sat in Mrs. Fletcher's parlor, sipping hot cider by the fire. Mrs. Fletcher had tactfully excused herself to visit a neighbor, giving them privacy. "Riley," Sarah said, setting down her cup, "where is this going, us, I mean?" Riley's heart kicked into a faster rhythm. "Where do you want it to go? I asked you first," he smiled. "Fair enough." He took a deep breath. "Sarah, I love you. I think I've loved you since that day at the trading post when you looked at me with such dignity and strength even though your whole world was falling apart. And every moment I've spent with you since then has only made me more certain." Sarah's eyes were shining with tears. "I love you too, so much it sometimes scares me." "What scares you about it?" "That it's too good to be true, that something will happen to take it away." Sarah twisted her hands in her lap. "My whole life I've lost everything good. My childhood, my family, my home. What if I lose you too?" Riley set down his own cup and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking both her hands in his. "You won't lose me, Sarah. Not unless you want to be rid of me, and even then I'll probably hang around hoping you'll change your mind." She laughed through her tears. "I won't ever want to be rid of you. Then marry me." The words came out before Riley had fully thought them through, but as soon as he said them, he knew they were right. "I know I don't have much to offer yet. I'm still saving for that land, still years away from having my own ranch. but I love you and I want to build a life with you. Say yes." Sarah was crying in earnest now, but she was smiling too. "Yes, of course yes." Riley surged up and kissed her, his first kiss, and the world seemed to explode into light and warmth and rightness. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Sarah was still smiling. "Mrs. Fletcher is going to be insufferable when she finds out," Sarah said. "She's been hinting about this for weeks. She probably planned this whole evening," Riley agreed, "leaving us alone with the fire and the cider. Definitely." Sarah took his face in her hands, her expression turning serious. "Riley, I need you to know something. What you did for me that day, it wasn't just about stopping my father from trading me to Pemberton. It was about showing me that there were good men in the world, men who do the right thing even when it costs them everything. You changed my life in every possible way." "You changed mine too," Riley said softly. "Before you, I was just existing, working toward a goal but with nothing else to make me happy. Now I have a reason for everything, a purpose beyond just surviving." They talked long into the night, making plans. They would marry in the spring, after the worst of the winter was past. Riley would keep working at the box tea, saving every penny he could, and Sarah would continue helping Mrs. Fletcher until the wedding. After they married, Sarah would live in the small cabin Riley shared with the other ranch hands, which would be cramped but temporary. Tom Cassidy had already hinted that he might be willing to sell Riley some cattle on credit, giving him a start toward his own herd. When Mrs. Fletcher returned home that evening, she took one look at their faces and announced, "Finally, I was beginning to think I'd have to hit you both over the head with a frying pan." The winter passed in a haze of preparation and anticipation. Sarah sewed her wedding dress with help from Mrs. Fletcher, a simple but beautiful gown of cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Riley worked overtime at the ranch, squirreling away every extra dollar he could earn. They sent word to Sarah's family about the wedding, though Sarah did not expect them to come. The breach between them had been too great, the hurt too deep. To her surprise, 2 weeks before the wedding, her mother appeared at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house. She looked older than Sarah remembered, worn down by hardship and grief, and she stood on the porch wringing her hands nervously. "Sarah," she said when Sarah opened the door, "I know I have no right to be here after what happened, but I had to come. I had to see you." Sarah felt a complicated surge of emotions, anger and hurt and love all tangled together. "Come in." They sat in the parlor, Mrs. Fletcher hovering protectively in the background, and Sarah's mother explained haltingly that Sarah's father had died 3 weeks earlier, his heart giving out while he was working in the field. "He never forgave himself," her mother said quietly, "for what he did to you. It ate at him every day." Sarah did not know how to feel about this news. Part of her was sad, grieving for the father she had once known before desperation had changed him. Part of her was still angry, still hurt. "I'm sorry," she said finally, because it was true, even if her feelings were complicated. "He wanted you to know that he was glad you were getting married," her mother continued. "When word reached us about you and the cowboy, he cried, said at least something good came out of what he did. How are the others, the children?" "Better. We've managed somehow. The plow helped, and the grain got us through the worst. Your brother recovered from his sickness. Your sisters ask about you constantly." Her mother twisted her handkerchief. "I know I can't undo what was done, Sarah, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you, of the life you've built. And I'd be honored to attend your wedding if you'll have me." Sarah thought about it, about forgiveness and grudges, about family and hurt. Finally, she nodded. "You can come. But Mother, I need you to understand something. What happened that day, it broke something between us. I don't know if it can be fixed." "I know," her mother said, tears streaming down her weathered face. but maybe we can start trying." The wedding took place on a beautiful April morning in 1879 in the small church in Salida with Reverend Matthews officiating. Sarah's mother was there, sitting quietly in the back, as were Mrs. Fletcher, Tom Cassidy, and several ranch hands from the Box T, and a surprising number of townsfolk who had come to know Sarah through her work at the boarding house. Rosa from the restaurant brought flowers from her carefully tended garden, and the church smelled of roses and hope. Riley stood at the altar in a new suit that Tom had helped him buy, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes locked on the back of the church as he waited for Sarah to appear. When she finally did, walking down the aisle alone because there was no one left to give her away, Riley felt his breath catch. She was beautiful, radiant, and she was looking at him like he was her whole world. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to love and honor and support each other through whatever life brought them. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Riley kissed Sarah with a tenderness that made several women in the congregation wipe their eyes. Afterward, there was a reception at Rosa's restaurant, with food and music and laughter. Sarah danced with Riley, with Tom Cassidy, even with Mrs. Fletcher's son who had come in from Denver for the occasion. But mostly she stayed close to Riley, her hand in his, marveling at how much her life had changed in less than a year. "Happy," Riley murmured in her ear as they swayed to the music. "Deliriously," Sarah confirmed. "You more than I have words for." As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Riley and Sarah slipped away to the small cabin that would be their home. The other ranch hands had moved their things to the bunkhouse for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy. It was not much, just one room with a bed and a stove and a small table, but Sarah looked around and saw not what it was but what it represented. A beginning, a foundation, a future. That night, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and care, learning each other's bodies with wonder and joy. Afterward, lying in Riley's arms, Sarah felt a peace she had never known before. She was loved. She was safe. She was home. The years that followed were not always easy. Ranch life was hard, the work endless, the pay modest. But Riley and Sarah built a life together, one day at a time, one small victory at a time. They saved money, slowly but surely. Riley proved himself invaluable to Tom Cassidy, who rewarded him with more responsibility and better pay. Sarah took in sewing and baking when she had time, adding her earnings to their savings. In the winter of 1880, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. Riley was overjoyed, terrified, and protective all at once. He insisted she stop taking in extra work, worried himself sick every time she felt the slightest discomfort. Sarah bore his fussing with patience and amusement, knowing it came from love. Their son was born in August of 1881, a healthy baby with Riley's gray-blue eyes and Sarah's dark hair. They named him Thomas Riley Mercer, after Tom Cassidy, who had been so good to them. Little Thomas was a happy baby, and watching Riley with their son, seeing the tenderness and love in his face as he held the tiny infant, Sarah fell in love with him all over again. By 1883, they had saved enough for Riley to make an offer on the land he had been dreaming of, that valley 20 miles west of Salida with good water and grass. Tom Cassidy helped Riley negotiate the sale, even loaned him part of the money at a fair interest rate. Suddenly, impossibly, they were landowners. Building their ranch was a monumental task. Riley worked on the ranch house himself, with help from Tom and some of the other ranch hands on their days off. It was a simple structure, 2 rooms with a loft and a wide porch, but it was solidly built and positioned to catch the morning sun. Sarah worked alongside Riley when she could, young Thomas playing nearby. And when the house was finally finished and they spent their first night in their own home on their own land, Sarah cried with happiness. They called the ranch the Mercy Creek Ranch, after the small creek that ran through their property. Riley started with 20 head of cattle purchased from Tom, and slowly built the herd through careful breeding and backbreaking work. Sarah planted a vegetable garden and kept chickens, sold eggs and produce in town to supplement their income. It was hard work, harder than anything either of them had done before, but it was theirs. In 1885, Sarah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rebecca May. She was a lively, curious child who kept them constantly on their toes. Thomas adored his little sister, and Riley joked that they would need to keep a shotgun handy for when Rebecca got older and boys started coming around. Life settled into a rhythm, the seasons turning, the children growing. They had setbacks, of course. A harsh winter in 1886 killed several head of cattle. A drought in 1888 made for a lean year. Riley broke his leg in 1890 and was laid up for weeks, driving everyone crazy with his frustration at being unable to work. But through it all, they had each other, and that made everything bearable. Mrs. Fletcher remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting often and doting on the children. Sarah's mother came once to meet her grandchildren, and there was a tentative reconciliation, not complete but better than nothing. Sarah's younger sisters visited occasionally, both now married with families of their own, and slowly, painfully, some of the wounds healed. By the turn of the century, Mercy Creek Ranch was one of the more prosperous small ranches in the area. They had expanded the house, adding 2 more rooms and a real kitchen. They had over 100 head of cattle, several horses, and a reputation for quality stock. Thomas, now 19, was talking about going to agricultural college in Fort Collins, wanting to learn new methods to bring back to the ranch. Rebecca, 15, was a skilled horsewoman who could rope and ride as well as any man. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, Riley took Sarah back to Salida, to the very spot where they had first met, outside the old trading post which was now a feed store. They stood there, older and weathered by 2 decades of hard work, but still holding hands like newlyweds. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "What you gave up for me that day?" Riley turned to her, his eyes as clear and steady as they had been that day 20 years ago. "Not for one single second. That was the best decision I ever made, Sarah. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Even though it took so long to get the ranch, all those extra years of working for Tom, especially because of that. Riley pulled her close. "If everything had gone according to my original plan, I'd have gotten my ranch a couple years sooner, sure. But I'd have been alone. I'd have had land and cattle and no one to share it with, no one to give it meaning. What you've given me, Sarah, what we've built together, it's worth more than any amount of money or time." Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Riley Mercer. I've loved you from the moment you stepped in and changed the course of my entire life. I love you too. Always have, always will." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other and their memories, as the town of Salida bustled around them. It had been a long journey from that desperate day in 1878 to this moment of peace and contentment, but every step had been worth it. In 1902, Thomas graduated from agricultural college and returned to the ranch, full of ideas for improvement and expansion. He had met a girl at school, a rancher's daughter from near Pueblo, and brought her home to meet the family. Her name was Caroline, and she was smart and kind and clearly adored Thomas. Riley and Sarah gave them their blessing, and the wedding was planned for the following spring. Rebecca, meanwhile, had set her sights on becoming a veterinarian, a bold ambition for a woman, but one that Riley and Sarah supported wholeheartedly. She was studying with the local veterinarian, Dr. Morrison, who said she had real talent. As Riley and Sarah entered their 50s, they began to step back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, letting Thomas take on more responsibility. They spent their time enjoying their grandchildren, 3 so far with another on the way, and each other. They took long rides through their property, remembering and reminiscing. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, still holding hands after all these years. Mrs. Fletcher passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1905, at the age of 82. At her funeral, Sarah spoke about how Mrs. Fletcher had been the mother she needed when her own mother could not be, how she had provided safety and support when Sarah had nothing. Half the town turned out to mourn her, a testament to the lives she had touched. Riley's old boss, Tom Cassidy, followed in 1907, and Riley was one of the pallbearers at his funeral. "He gave me my start," Riley told Sarah that night, his voice rough with grief. "Without him, we might never have made it." "We'd have made it," Sarah assured him. "Maybe not the same way, but we'd have made it, because we had each other." By 1910, Mercy Creek Ranch had expanded significantly. Thomas and his wife Caroline had 3 children, and they had built their own house on the property, a little ways from the main house. Rebecca had indeed become a veterinarian, one of the first women in Colorado to achieve the distinction, and she had married a rancher from a neighboring spread. The ranch employed several permanent hands and seasonal workers, and was known throughout the region for its quality cattle and horses. Riley was 60 years old now, his dark hair gone silver, his face deeply lined by decades in the sun and wind. But his eyes were still that same striking gray-blue, and when he looked at Sarah, they still held all the love and devotion they had on their wedding day. Sarah, 53, had laugh lines around her eyes and mouth, and her hands were rough from a lifetime of work. But she was still beautiful to Riley, still the woman he had risked everything for. They had just finished dinner one evening in the spring of 1911, sitting on their porch and watching their grandchildren play in the yard, when Sarah said softly, "Thank you." Riley turned to her, surprised. "For what?" "For giving it all back and keeping only me." Riley was confused for a moment, then understood. She was talking about that day, 33 years ago, when he had traded his entire savings for her and then given her freedom, asking for nothing in return. "Sarah, I told you then, and I've told you 1,000 times since, that was the best decision, I know," Sarah interrupted gently. "But I realized I never really thanked you properly, not just for buying my freedom, but for all of it, for courting me with such patience and respect, for building this life with me, for being the kind of man who gives a plow and 2 sacks of grain back to a desperate farmer and asks only for the chance to know his daughter." "That's not quite how it happened," Riley said, but he was smiling. "I didn't give anything back." "But you gave me my life," Sarah said. "And then you let me choose to give it to you. That's the same thing, Riley. You could have demanded anything from me, could have held that debt over my head, but you didn't. You set me free and then waited to see if I'd choose you. And I did every day since then. I've chosen you every single day." Riley felt tears prick his eyes, something that rarely happened but seemed to come easier with age. "And I've chosen you every single day." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Their grandchildren's laughter echoed across the yard. Smoke rose from the chimney of Thomas and Caroline's house. Cattle lowed in the distance. It was a symphony of life, of family, of love built on the foundation of one cowboy's impulsive act of kindness 33 years ago. You think things happen for a reason. Sarah asked dreamily. "Do you think we were meant to find each other?" "I don't know about fate or destiny," Riley said thoughtfully. "But I know that I'm grateful every day that I happened to be in Salada that morning, that I happened to be at the trading post at exactly the right time. If I'd been an hour earlier or an hour later, everything would have been different." "I'm grateful too," Sarah said, "for all of it, even the hard parts, because they made us who we are." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their eldest grandson, little Riley Thomas Mercer, came running up to the porch. He was 7 years old, full of energy and curiosity. "Grandpa, Grandma, will you tell us the story again?" "What story, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, though she knew perfectly well what he meant. "The story of how you met, how Grandpa rescued you." Riley and Sarah exchanged a smile. It had become a family legend, the story of how they met, though they always softened some of the harsher details for the children's ears. "Well," Riley began, pulling his grandson onto his lap, "it all started on a very hot day in July, 33 years ago. Your grandmother needed help, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time. And Grandpa gave away all his money for Grandma," little Riley interjected, having heard the story many times before. "Not for Grandma," Sarah corrected gently. "To help Grandma, there's a difference." "And then you fell in love," the boy said excitedly. "Yes," Riley confirmed, looking at Sarah with all the love of 3 decades together. "Then we fell in love, the kind of love that lasts forever." "Will I find love like that?" the boy asked innocently. "I hope so," Sarah said, ruffling his hair. "I hope you find someone who makes you want to be your best self, someone you can build a life with through good times and bad." The other grandchildren had wandered over by now, drawn by the familiar story, and soon all 5 of them were clustered on the porch, listening as Riley and Sarah recounted their meeting, their courtship, their wedding. They told stories of the early days of the ranch, of struggles and triumphs, of building something from nothing through hard work and determination. As the children listened, wide-eyed and enthralled, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She thought about that terrified 20-year-old girl standing in the trading post yard, being bartered like property, certain her life was over. That girl could never have imagined this future, this abundance of love and family and belonging. Riley must have been thinking something similar, because he caught her eye and smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip a beat. She smiled back, and in that smile was everything. "Thank you, I love you, I would choose you 1,000 times over." Later that night, after the grandchildren had been collected by their parents and the house was quiet, Riley and Sarah lay in their bed, the same bed they had shared for over 30 years. Through the open window, they could hear the night sounds they had grown so familiar with, crickets chirping, an owl hooting, the distant lowing of cattle. "Sarah," Riley said softly into the darkness. "Yes. If you could go back and change anything about our life, would you?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering. "No," she finally said. "Not a single thing. Even the hard parts made us stronger. Even the sad parts taught us to appreciate the good times. It's all been worth it, Riley. Every single moment. Even that day at the trading post." "Especially that day at the trading post," Sarah said firmly. "Because that was the day everything changed. That was the day I met you, the day I learned that there was kindness in the world, that there were men who did the right thing even when it cost them everything. That was the day my real life began." Riley pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was a sound she had fallen asleep to countless times, a sound that meant safety and home and love. "I would do it all again," Riley murmured. "I would give up everything I had, everything I would ever have, just for the chance to know you, to love you." "I know," Sarah whispered, "and that's why I love you so much." They drifted off to sleep that way, wrapped in each other and the memories of a life well lived. Outside, the moon rose over Mercy Creek Ranch, illuminating the land they had built together, the legacy they were leaving for their children and grandchildren. It was a legacy built not on wealth or status, but on something far more valuable, a love that had started with an act of selfless courage and had grown stronger with every passing year. In the years that followed, Riley and Sarah remained active and engaged with the ranch and their family, but they increasingly left the management to Thomas. They took more time for themselves, for each other, traveling occasionally to Denver or Colorado Springs, attending the weddings of grandchildren, welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. Rebecca became a respected veterinarian and advocate for women's rights, never forgetting the example her parents had set of equality and partnership in marriage. Thomas expanded Mercy Creek Ranch to over 1,000 acres, one of the largest and most successful ranches in the region. Riley and Sarah's story became something of a legend in Salida and the surrounding area. People would point them out when they came to town, the elderly couple who still held hands like newlyweds, and whisper about the cowboy who had given up everything for a stranger and found his fortune in love instead. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919, their children and grandchildren threw them a huge celebration. Nearly 100 people attended, from family to old friends to neighbors from miles around. There were speeches and toasts, and Rebecca stood up to say, "My parents taught us that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. It's putting someone else's needs before your own. It's sacrifice and commitment and working together toward a common goal. They've shown us for 40 years what a real marriage looks like, and we're all better people for it." Sarah cried, of course, and Riley had to clear his throat several times, his own eyes suspiciously bright. When they were finally alone that night, Sarah said, "How did we get so lucky?" "It wasn't luck," Riley countered. "It was choice. I chose to step in that day at the trading post. You chose to give me a chance. We chose to build this life together. Every good thing we have, we chose. Then I'm grateful for every choice we made," Sarah said. In 1923, Riley developed pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. He was 73 years old, and for a while it looked like he might not recover. Sarah barely left his bedside, tending to him with the same fierce devotion he had shown her for 44 years. The whole family gathered, fearing the worst, but Riley was tough, toughened by decades of ranch work and sustained by his love for Sarah. Slowly, he began to recover. When he was finally well enough to sit up and talk, the first thing he said was, "Can't get rid of me that easily. I've got a few more years in me yet." "You'd better," Sarah said, half laughing and half crying. "You promised me forever, Riley Mercer, and I'm holding you to it." And Riley did have a few more years. He and Sarah celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929. Surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. They had lived to see automobiles replace horses on the roads, had seen electricity come to Salida, had watched the world change in ways they never could have imagined as young people. Through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation on which everything else was built. They grew old together, their steps slower, their memories sometimes fuzzy, but their love as strong as it had been that day on Mrs. Fletcher's porch when Riley first kissed Sarah and promised to spend his life loving her. Riley passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1932, at the age of 82. Sarah was lying beside him, as she had for over 50 years, and she held his hand as he took his last breath. At his funeral, the The church in Salida was packed with people whose lives he had touched. Thomas gave a eulogy, talking about his father's integrity, his work ethic, his devotion to family. But it was Sarah who had the last word. "My husband once gave up everything he had for a stranger," she told the assembled mourners, her voice steady despite her grief. "He traded his life savings, his dreams, his future, for a girl he didn't know because it was the right thing to do. That was the measure of the man. He lived his whole life that way, putting others first, doing what was right even when it was hard. He was the best man I ever knew, and I was blessed beyond measure to be his wife." Sarah lived for 3 more years after Riley's death, staying at the ranch and watching her family grow. She was surrounded by love, supported by children and grandchildren who adored her. But those who knew her well could see that a light had gone out in her. She was waiting, they said, waiting to be reunited with her Riley. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1935, at the age of 77. She was buried next to Riley in the Salida Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, "Riley and Sarah Mercer, together forever." At her funeral, Rebecca told her children and grandchildren the full story of how her parents met, holding nothing back. She told them about the trading post, about the desperate trade, about the cowboy who stepped in and changed everything. She told them about love and sacrifice, about choosing right over easy, about building a life on a foundation of respect and devotion. "Never forget where you came from," Rebecca said. "Never forget the courage it took for your grandfather to do what he did, or the strength it took for your grandmother to build a new life from ashes. They gave us all this, all of us, every opportunity we have. We owe it to them to live well, to love deeply, to treat each other with the same respect and devotion they showed each other." The Mercy Creek Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas and his descendants. The story of Riley and Sarah became a family legend, passed down through generations. Their great-great-grandchildren still gather at the ranch for holidays, still tell the story of the cowboy who gave up everything for a stranger and found his fortune in love. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, people swear they can see 2 figures walking hand in hand across the ranch property, an older couple moving slowly but surely, still together, still in love. Whether it's truth or legend, no one can say for certain. But those who believe in the enduring power of love, in the kind of devotion that transcends even death, they believe. They believe in Riley and Sarah, in a love story that started with an act of courage and ended only when they were reunited in eternity. Because some loves are too strong for even death to diminish. Some loves are built to last forever. And the love between a cowboy who gave up his dreams for a stranger and the woman who chose to give him her heart, that was a love for the ages, a love that would echo through the generations, inspiring others to choose courage over comfort, love over fear, and forever over anything less. Their legacy lived on in every child who learned their story, in every person who chose to do the right thing even when it cost them everything, in every couple who faced adversity together and came out stronger. Riley and Sarah Mercer had lived simply, had never been wealthy or famous, had never sought recognition or reward. But they had loved deeply and truly, and in the end, that was the greatest legacy anyone could leave. In Salida, Colorado, there stands a historical marker now, placed by their descendants in 2010. It tells the story of Riley Mercer, who in 1878 gave his life savings to save a woman from being traded, and of Sarah, who chose to love him for the rest of her life. It stands near where the old trading post once was, now long gone, replaced by modern buildings and paved streets. But the story remains, a reminder of a time when the West was still wild, when life was hard but love could still flourish, when one person's courage could change not just one life, but generations of lives to come. And every year, on the anniversary of their wedding, their descendants gather at the ranch for a celebration. They tell the story again, making sure the younger generation knows where they came from, knows the sacrifice and love that built their family. They raise a glass to Riley and Sarah, to love that endures, to courage that inspires, to a legacy that will never be forgotten. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not wealth or fame or power, but love. The kind of love that Riley showed when he stepped in to help a stranger. The kind of love that Sarah showed when she chose to trust again, to open her heart again, to build a life with a man who had given her the greatest gift anyone could give: freedom and choice. The kind of love that sustained them through 53 years of marriage, through hardship and triumph, through joy and sorrow. The kind of love that created a legacy that would live on long after they were gone. That was the love of Riley and Sarah Mercer. And it was a love worth telling, worth remembering, worth aspiring to. A love that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest decisions, that sometimes giving up everything is the only way to gain what truly matters. A love that started with a plow and 2 sacks of grain, and ended with a legacy that would last forever.